if you're burnt out, overwhelmed, overworked, and you're definitely not operating at 100%. Your brain's just not. I usually use the analogy about like you might be operating 50% capacity. The reason you might be working long hours is because you're trying to do 8 hours of work, but you're operating at 50% capacity. So guess what? It means twice as many hours. And that's why it feels so tough and overwhelming for what should be a normal amount of work.
Great. Welcome back, folks, to the Executive Excel podcast. I'm very happy to welcome Eric Williams here today. Eric Williams is the founder of Willity, who is bringing over 2 decades of leadership experience, managing 1,000 plus employees and advising over 300 business leaders. Through Willity, he helps overwhelmed executives and entrepreneurs revitalize their businesses and lives by focusing on streamlining their workload, developing future strategies, and enhancing team dynamics. His approach leads to reduced stress levels among CEOs, increased job satisfaction, and better work-life integration. Beyond the practical aspects of his work, Eric is passionate about the profound personal impact of his clients' lives. His guidance helps preserve marriages by enabling stressed-out executives to become more present partners, very important, strengthens parent-child relationships by reducing work distractions, and promotes healthier lifestyles by alleviating that chronic stress impact. His work ultimately empowers leaders to avoid business crises while maximizing their potential and positive impact. Welcome to the show.
Great. Tammy, so great to be here. Excited to talk to you about this.
Yeah, this is something I think that both of us have a passion for, which is essentially leadership wellness, which ultimately leads to enhanced performance. Let's be frank, right? And so I always like to start with where your story is in terms of what brought you to this kind of work, and just maybe share a little bit about yourself to the audience so they can get to know you.
Yeah. So I come to this work, my bio that you shared included a lot of those journey, the key elements of getting here, but where it intersects with wellness and where this work really is kind of at the heart of it is not just about doing more. It's not just about kind of doing more in the grind. It's not about sacrificing your time with your family and just getting more. I mean, we can also talk about it as more profit or more impact. It's about finding where that balance is. And so so I say that because part of my journey and my interest in this area, my expertise in this area comes from actually being the number 2 for a lot of folks who are visionary leaders, but get stuck in the mud of the operations implementation and actually getting to the goal. And so in a lot, like throughout my career and throughout and then kind of as I've had this consultancy and had worked with a lot of clients through my business, kind of filling a similar role, similar kind of number 2 sort of operational implementer, as support in that ecosystem. I've just seen a lot of entrepreneurs and founders really get trapped in that startup move. And even if it's 5 years or 10 years down the road, just getting trapped in overwork, overwhelm, just getting in over their heads. And sometimes it's that busy day turns into a busy week, turns into a busy month, turns into a busy quarter. And then it's just years later of just keeping their head above water. Right. So that's really where I come to this work from, is kind of being, in the operations, building out and so I come to this from more of an operational side, an operational lens, a systems lens. How do we solve this in the practice and procedure within the operations so that it can be replicable, so that you can know how to compartmentalize these pieces? Yes, there's absolutely a psychological component. And that's, I think, the part of the journey that's been, let's say, the back half of my journey to this point, is recognizing how much goes into the social, emotional mindset and mental state of the folks that we're working with, right? Because that's, at the end of the day, a lot of where things get hung up. It's not just about, yes, you can build a great operational system in the business, but if the entrepreneur doesn't have their head in the right space and isn't approaching this from the right perspective, they can just go back and fall back into old habits. So that's been a lot of the more recent learning there and stuff that I've applied to my work.
Yeah, so burnout's very near and dear to me. I've experienced burnout twice, and was the main reason for my career shift from my corporate executive role that I was in prior to becoming an executive wellness coach myself. And what I love about in the research I've done around you, what I love is the notion that burnout is not just about personal resilience, right? It's about that sort of, you're mentioning that systems lens piece, that broken business systems, I think, is the language that you've used. Can you break that down a little further for folks that are listening, like when you say, you're looking at the systems lens, and having done an MA in leadership, I understand what that means, but just maybe bringing it down to those common structural issues that can impact a leader's stress levels.
Let
Yeah.
me dive into a couple of examples that I think are going to hit home to illustrate
Mhm.
it, because there's a lot more involved there, but there's a couple of common ways that this shows up if someone's listening and they say, what do I need to be looking for? Like, I'm burnt
Right.
out. Do I know, is it in my business? Is it in myself? How do I tell? So one of those things is how you're building your team, how you're delegating, how you're structuring your interaction with the rest of the team and the business, how the business kind of communicates back up to you, or your team as a leader communicates back up to you. And so delegation is one of those key areas. And it seems like common sense when I say, oh, you need to delegate your work, but how you do it, how you
Mhm.
structure it, how you think through, how are you making decisions? How can you communicate the framework that you're bringing to the equation to the people on your team? Not just say, go do this, because if you say, go do this, that person on your team is going to take their own mental frame to the
Yep.
decision making process. And that's where you see a lot of kind of infighting or conflict with, managers, leaders, and their team, is between this miscommunication, right? Like,
Yeah.
even if you communicate it perfectly, everybody has their own lens that they're viewing the world through, their own framework for decision making, and so there's a big disconnect there. And I associate this in with how you structurally think about delegation, how you build that into the process and operations of your business, because that's part of the issue here, is that you're kind of throwing things. You're saying, oh, I have someone new on my team, let me get this off my plate. But it's very easy to throw something at somebody else and have it come back to you incomplete, not full, not complete in the way that you would have expected,
Right.
or just the decisions were wrong in the way compared to what you wanted to do. And that's partly, I would say, the failure of the leader to communicate well and to be able to delegate well. But that's one of the big areas where even when you want to get stuff off your plate, if you don't have a system to do that well, a structure, I need context, I need walkthrough of the details. Here's what I'm expecting. Here's where you have leeway. Here's where you don't have leeway. Like the whole set of things that you need to do. If you don't have a process around that, then you're constantly getting this back to you, and it takes over your time in your life, having to course correct, and either do the work for them or be very involved in something you thought was off your plate.
Yeah. Boundaries and also delegation are the two biggest issues I see in my clients. And delegation really comes down to trust. And so I like the way you framed it, where you need that sort of those contexts and those really particular pieces. I had a leader once, though, that I reported to, who I think had a skill set issue, was a bit overwhelmed with the role that they had assumed. And so when they attempted to delegate, they couldn't provide the context because they were lacking the context. So
Mhm.
I wonder if you have any thoughts around that, because I know for me it was really difficult to provide what that individual was looking for, because it seemed like every time I brought a painting, or I called it a painting, it's not a painting. It was as if I was bringing an abstract piece of art. It's like, well, I want art, but that's not abstract. But he wouldn't know what to tell me what he wanted, and I was like, I'd
Mhm.
come back with like something a little bit more landscapey, and I'm using that as an analogy, and he would go, no, that's not it. But what is it that you're looking for? So then, how do
Mhm.
you help leaders to really be clear when they provide that context, so that they get the results they're looking for, and they don't have this back and forth that can really be draining for leaders and add to the
Yeah.
stress?
Leaders are carrying a tremendous amount of that context in their head, and it's usually this black box that they
Yeah.
carry around for a long time. This is one of the areas I also see one of the harder ways to deconstruct, and that's why I say there's a mental framework that's the built on your upbringing, your
Mhm.
education, your work experience, your experience in this particular role, this particular company. And so that's why this is such a complicated thing to try to untangle what's going into this, because sometimes it's what decision would you make as the manager, as the leader? And then, but also thinking about what outcome am I looking, what are the bounds of the outcome that I'm looking for that's acceptable? Because
Mhm.
you don't have to have people on your team that are mini me's. They don't have to be exactly, and that you actually don't want people exactly like that, but you want them to be able to deliver an outcome that you're expecting,
Mhm.
and it could even be better than what you could do on your own, right? That's the ideal situation when you have people on your team. You have to think through, and this is why spending more time on the context, more time on delegation, it's almost that, especially on the early or the kind of early ones as you're trying to put this in place, kind of I'm going to use the word interrogating yourself about what is really going on. What are in this case and in other cases like this, for example, if it's communication with the client, there might be a specific context about that client that you need to communicate that the person you're delegating to doesn't necessarily have it. How is that client different from another client that they might be responding to? Like, think about it in that particular situation and about the other situations that they might encounter that are like this. This is how you start to build the standard operating procedures for the work, right? And the ultimate goal is to have your team members have the framework, the rubric about how to make decisions that approximate your decisions or exceed exceed the quality of the outcome that you're looking for. And so that's why it's not ever just about the one project. It's about that project, how does it fit into other projects? How am I adding this context to the larger framework for decision making about the stuff that I have delegated to this person, their roles and responsibilities? And so that's why I want to kind of zoom out on the context. It's not just strictly about the task delegation. It is about how am I interrogating myself enough about how someone should make a decision about it, how I would make a decision about it. Why am I choosing this outcome versus this outcome for this client, but I'm choosing this outcome over this outcome for this other client? Really getting that level of detail and then being able to communicate that. And that's where documenting it into some kind of standard operating procedures, whether it's a walkthrough video, written, whatever it is, just stuff that you can have live for posterity so it's easier to delegate in the future. That's really the goal. I'm not saying that you're going to save time on the front end, but the goal is to save time over time and have a better repeatable outcome with folks on your team down the road.
Yeah. And it also helps with growing your team so that you can be replaced, in the sense that I always believed in this for my own teams when I was leading teams. Was I always wanted to make sure someone could backfill me so that I could disconnect, so that I could take the weekend off my phone and completely not be on the beck and call of senior management. Because unfortunately, for a lot of execs and a lot of leaders, you're kind of at the beck and call, in some cases, a CEO. In my case, it was a vice president, and you want to stay connected because you're afraid or worried that maybe that last minute request for something on a Saturday might come through. And so you never really get to disconnect and just coming back to wellness, be able to take care of yourself. So I feel like all of this is so intimately tied to building what I call a battle rhythm, right? Where you have a series of people 2 and 3 deep from you who could, in theory, replace you for a short period of time. They don't replace you from a skill set or from a leadership perspective necessarily, but they have the capacity to backfill you so you can disconnect, right? And I think that's super important too.
Yeah, Tammy, and I think you're picking up on another detail that I thought about it as I was answering that other question. I wanted to get back to is the importance of disconnecting, getting back in your own rhythm, and getting your energy, restoring your energy, however you want to think about it. Because one of the other challenges is with that, talking about building your framework and being able to communicate, delegate effectively, be able to use what you're uniquely qualified to do. If you're burnt out, overwhelmed, overworked, and you're definitely not operating at 100%. Your brain's just not. I usually use the analogy about, like, you might be operating 50% capacity. The reason you might be working long hours is because you're trying to do 8 hours of work, but you're operating at 50% capacity. So guess what? It means twice as many hours. And that's why it feels so tough and overwhelming for what should be a normal amount of work. Because when you're burnt out, that's kind of what happens, is that your effectiveness goes down quite a lot. Whether it's 50% or not, we can debate that. But but so if you don't have and if you don't have that time to disconnect and recover and operate at 100%, then you're just continuing in the cycle. That's like I talk about it as a downward spiral, where it doesn't ever get better. You're either stuck in the same kind of spiral level or you're going down. And it really just takes these couple of incremental steps to move back up. It's not about like leaps and bounds. It's about putting in those habits and behaviors to like give you those quick wins and then some next wins, and just start to work your way back up the spiral. So it's not like one day you get to sleep and then you're going to be back at 100%. It's that in some weeks or some months, putting these practices in place, you'll start to see the benefits and it'll start to accelerate.
Yeah, I kind of try to encourage my clients to come up with daily, weekly, and monthly sort of behaviors that they can start to build into their practices. So whether it's taking an entire weekend off a month where they just disconnect and they delegate to someone in the office to sort of cover you while you're away, daily routines, either around, turning off the phone or reading or meditating or going for walks or whatever it is daily. And then you've got those weekly sort of to keep you on track, because you're absolutely right. It's so, so, so important to disconnect. And that connection between performance and recharge is extremely important. And unfortunately, what I often see is, at least in some of the public domain organizations that I've worked with, is that wellness coaching is often one of the first things to go out the window for cost effectiveness. What they don't realize, it's not a nice to have. This is a requirement. It should be a part of that executive package, if you will. I always am a firm believer that every executive should have someone who holds them accountable to their own wellness.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, if you're doing that, you will have a more performant executive. Because you're right. If you don't have those behaviors or those plans in place, you ultimately are going to be working at a much lower capacity.
Yeah. And it's also even hard to think about it. Like your brain just doesn't work very well. You can still grind through the work, yes, for a while, but the kind of time and space to solve the problems that you really are there to solve, those things require you to be fully present, operating as close to 100% of your brain as possible. And it's just tough to do that. And that's why these kind of incremental steps, those getting back into, getting 5%, it's like a 5% increase in performance that then has and the next positive effect of giving you some extra space. And so if you don't have time, if you are overwhelmed and overworked and don't have the time, for example, when we talk about the delegation framework, if you don't feel like you have the time to do that, it's going to shoot you in the foot. Like these things are just cyclical. Like because you don't have the time, because you haven't made the time to really do the deep thinking, because you're in brain fog, because you haven't been sleeping well, because you're working until 1 a.m., 2 a.m. is causing these problems.
Yeah, they all become these negative feedback loops kind of thing, where it all kind of feeds into each other. I remember when I was a very younger executive, early leader, I used to get told, you're very operational, but you're not strategic. And that wasn't necessarily the case, but I was focusing too much on my operational duties, if you will, as a leader when I was a senior manager. And so therefore, it kind of cut me off in terms of being considered for executive positions. It was only when I became more strategic, that bigger picture, that suddenly it was executive material. So how do you help leaders, especially those that want to go up the chain of command potentially in an organization, or maybe they're just overwhelmed operators who are just, leading their businesses? How do you move them from that more operational? You talked about systems, but are there other critical steps that maybe you want to bring or highlight at this point?
Yeah, I use a bigger framework, even though I've been taught using delegation as the example.
Yeah.
It is a bigger picture, because typically people have things that they can totally wipe out of their schedule. Sometimes you see this described as just saying no to more, not taking as much on your plate. That's an essential step of clearing your plate, clearing stuff out, doing just take a step back. Does this really need to happen? Do I need to be spending this much time? Is this really relating to my goals in moving my team forward, the company forward? There's usually a lot of time. I mean, is there in a 40-hour work week, is there 5 or 10 hours of that sort of stuff? Usually, that's just, to be honest, like there's a decent amount of stuff that just can be wiped out entirely, even though it's really hard when you're in burnout. It's hard to see those things. I'm not saying that when you're in burnout, the stuff's not hard. It's just that this is what you need to do to get out of it, is just take one step at a time, take out one thing, free up 1 hour, free up 2 hours the next week, do this step by step. So taking stuff out, batching your time so you're not constantly multitasking is one of those. Even though I coach this stuff, not like I don't have busy weeks. This week is one of those. And I actually double down on the stuff that I teach in those weeks that, I'm flexing into it being busy, but it means that I need to hold sacred my deep work time. It's even more important that I'm not multitasking, because I need to be able to just zoom in, focus on this thing for whether it's an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever the project is. And so those are the type of things you need to do. So like the batching, keeping your brain not multitasking, doubling down on not multitasking actually when you're really deep in this. And then thinking through what parts can be systematized. That is related, always a pair with me and what I teach around delegation. Whether it's for you, you can systematize what you're doing so you don't have to go back and reinvent the wheel every time. Think about things that can be, whether it's a bullet point list, a reference sheet for the future, a walkthrough video you can watch. Sometimes it's just for yourself. You're delegating it to your future self. You need to have an outline of what you did so you can jump into it and don't need to get your brain all the way back to a project you did last quarter or last year. Delegation is a big one, and automation, if there's opportunities to do things better, faster with tech tools and technology. AI is a big aspect for people who are doing knowledge work, where you can essentially delegate to the AI or do automation pieces of the puzzle that can help you. But figuring out where those opportunities are, it's not just AI; it could be some other tools that just help you go better, faster, more accurately through your project. But usually, this takes a step back to assess really what's going on. Where's my time going? Is it aligned with my goals? If not, or even if so, how do I need to look at the full picture of my schedule, what tasks I have, what's occupying my time, and then start to work with this framework to shift and change parts of the schedule, parts of the tasks, so that you can really clean it up, get things reorganized and reoriented around what you need to do this quarter, this year, and moving forward.
You kind of briefly mentioned AI and automation, and obviously this is a very hot topic for most leaders right now. So it is definitely changing the way we're doing business. It's changing the way we market ourselves. It's changing the way we draft content now. So from your perspective, how will this shift or change how leaders lead going forward? Like, what are your thoughts on that in terms of like expand that thought process around the AI piece? I'd be interested in hearing that.
We could do a whole session just on AI with
Right.
leaders, but really the trends we're seeing is around a lot of the knowledge work, things that we thought that we would hold sacred in terms of leadership skills and the visionary strategic thinking, even for people who are very highly trained in their particular area of expertise. We're seeing AI be able to take on significant chunks of it. It doesn't mean that we're moving into an area where AI tools are going to totally replace folks. It just means that there are opportunities to leverage those tools to keep what you're contributing in the ecosystem focus on what you can uniquely contribute, right? It's essentially what else can you contribute. If you have the kind of heavy legwork or the heavy lifting might actually be done with AI support in this example, but it frees you up to not have to do as much of the admin, as much of the operational pieces of the puzzle. And I think that's the real interesting opportunity here is that, if we think back, I don't know why this came up in a conversation a few weeks ago, but an automated spell checker, right? If you said, I'm only going to hire people who can spell perfectly without the assistance of any tools and technology. You could do that. I mean, that's how the world had to operate before spell check. But now it sort of doesn't matter if as long as someone can spell reasonably well and spell check and do that, you don't need that exacting precision around spell checking necessarily. I'm diverging from the point because I think I can also critique my own point here. But let's just say that reasonable level of spell checking and grammar and such that you need to be able to look through the document. But is AI going to be a tool like that, where it's essentially that it sort of doesn't matter that you can actually draft the whole idea as long as you're the originator of the idea and you can communicate with the AI? Here's what I'm looking for. Here's the constraints. Here's the context. Speaking about delegating, and then be able to generate something. Use your expertise to read and review, critique it, edit it, shift it, and change it. But I've also seen AI come up with really new interesting ideas whenever I've used it, when I've had clients use it. There are new things that are coming out because new ideas that are coming out of the process that they haven't necessarily thought about. So I think it's a tool to be able to think about and use and think about how it works in your workflow, where you can use it to save an hour or two on drafting. You might be able to just do a voice note, throw that in, have it draft up an outline, and saves you hours of actually just sitting there behind the keyboard, writing the outline, typing in the words yourself,
Yeah, formatting, do whatever that we would struggle with in the past. Yeah. The the one thing that I come from a health background, a health executive background. So one of the things that I am, we could talk about AI for a long time as well. Like I have an interest in this, but is the notion that AI is still very much at its sort of early stages. And as a result, a lot of the stuff that comes from AI can be riddled with bias because the data that exists online right now may in and of itself have a certain bias tinge to it. So for me as a leader, one of the things I encourage my clients to do if they're going to use AI for anything in their businesses or in their corporate jobs is to really do a review with that lens on to ensure that what you're getting back and what you're using or as feedback to develop whatever products or processes, that it isn't constrained by bias potentially. I'll give you an example. And it's a silly example potentially, but it kind of exemplifies this. If you were to do an AI search, for example, it's not a leadership one, it's a health related, and you said, what are the top, 5 causes of heart disease and the top 5 symptoms of heart disease in humans? It will give you the male version of it because there's not a lot of data that exists out there yet on studies done in women, for example, on certain what cholesterol drugs do, for example. So they're very different. We respond very differently because our bodies are not the same. And so that's the only highlight I would say is with AI is just make sure that you kind of look at it, as you stated, with your professional lens, with your professional knowledge, so that you're cutting out any of that potential bias or that potential flavor out of the result that you get. Fascinating subject. Again, could talk about that all day, but bringing it back to wellness though, what are some of your personal boundaries or non-negotiables that helps you to maintain your own balance and well-being as you work with your clients?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have 2 small kids, and that's perhaps the big feels like the biggest constraint, or I don't want to say constraint in a positive way, a boundary that I keep sacred. And so it just means being done at a certain time, so I can spend time after they come home with them, and time in the morning. And it's really just, I don't want to say it's non-negotiable. There are times, if there's a major event, if there's a conference, whatever, make adjustments. Don't be super rigid on it, but also don't allow meetings to creep into certain times of the day. And I've occasionally had relatively important meetings that run into that time, and I just have to communicate and say, hey, this is the time that I have blocked off. I need to go. Let's reconnect. Or you guys keep talking. Let me get a there's ways to set those boundaries and understand. I think as leaders and managers, it's important to model that behavior as well,
Right.
because that gives permission to other people on to do that as well. I think that's one of the more challenging parts as I've done work in workplace and family policy as well. Modeling that behavior, especially when folks start to diverge in age as leaders and executives, being able to harken back to the time and moments in life, for example, on the family side, and being able to model that behavior or okay that behavior and be verbal about it in terms of and being explicit about those boundaries. Because executives and leaders have a tremendous, they may not realize it, but the very subtle cues that they give off really do make an impact. And if you're listening and you have supervisor, executive that you report to, for example, that some are good at communicating that and creating that environment about what's okay, like where are the boundaries at work and what's okay and what's not okay. If you get your work done, are you able to go out to your kids' event that might be happening at 4:00 rather than at 5:00 or 6:00 when you normally sign off, right? Like those subtle cues, how you respond to those situations are important. So I know I'm getting off on a little tangent here, but when I talk about my boundaries, that's an important boundary. Sleep at the end of the day, not that I'm perfect, but I practice what I preach, getting to bed at a regular hour early. I tend to actually now go to sleep earlier and get up earlier and enjoy the time in the morning. And knowing that if I need some extra time to sleep, I can sleep until a little bit later. But, it's like sleep is important, regular exercise, getting outside, just some of the fundamentals that I make sure are anchored. These are not nice to haves, these are need to have, so that I can bring my best self to my work with clients, so that I can be clear headed. There's also an element of making sure that my schedule and my workload and a number of clients I'm working with is at a certain level, because yes, I could do more, but I've been there and I know I'm trying to calibrate this into where can I bring 100% of my focus and expertise to my clients, and where in the past have I gotten overwhelmed and had a little bit too much, right? So that's that kind of active look at my schedule about how I'm feeling, how does my body feel in the situation, how am I reacting to different things on my calendar, like just being that kind of mindfulness and self-awareness throughout the day, just to understand, what's the current setup, what do I need to change, what do I need to shift, what do I need to be aware of with my business.
Yeah, I love that. I love the notion of really espousing your values through your actions, the way you're explaining it to me, because anyone who's a fan of the Leadership Challenge, which I am from Cruises and Posner, they tell the first leadership rule is modeling the way, right? And so the fact that you allow yourself permission to establish those boundaries, it's especially important if you're the CEO or the COO or CFO, because you're establishing that. And there's a really important point in all of that is it's building trust on making sure that your implicit and explicit actions or values are expressed. So if there's a discord between what you say and what you do, you lose trust of your organization. Whereas if you say, I have a boundary around this, or I have a respect of work-life balance, but you're sending emails and expecting responses at, say, 8 or 9 o'clock at night or on a Saturday, those don't align. And so you lose the trust. So I love what you're saying, because it really does help, not just to help yourself stay balanced, but it actually demonstrates and builds trust in your organization as well, in you as a leader. So really important point there. Leaders are drowning right now. They're feeling like they don't have time or the capacity to do something in their business or in their corporate workspace. What's one practical immediate action that they could start taking today to create space or to create that change? If you had to give them like a one tip, I know you've got a lot of good ideas, but like if there's one thing that floats to the top for you, what would it be?
I know my answers are always, I feel like I give a similar answer, but it's because if I can give some very like tips and tricks on this as an answer to this, but that's not really where I like to go with this type of a question.
Yeah.
Because what it's going to take to get out of overwork and overwhelm is kind of a long journey. There's a lot involved. I don't want to overwhelm people in saying that it's not achievable, because it absolutely is. It's the consistency and small steps over time that really make a difference. And so the answer I want to give here is actually about galvanizing yourself enough around, is this a serious problem for you, or is it just a nice to have? Is this where you're on the edge of divorce because you've been working so hard for so long that you've gotten disconnected from your spouse? Is this an issue of not seeing your kids and working till
Mm.
8, 9, 10 every night and getting home when they're already in bed and you just haven't seen them and they feel disconnected? All these things are real things that I've had clients, sometimes multiple things. Sometimes it's substance abuse as a means of coping with the situation. And at the end of the day, it's really about how committed are you to actually getting this solved and letting yourself sit in the pain of what's actually going on in your current state of being long enough to decide whether this is something that you want to get, whether you want to solve this or not. Is it
Yeah.
something you want to do what it takes, even if it's hard, even if you need to do, a couple more hours on top of an already long work week to sit down and solve it? Because those couple of hours will save you a couple of hours the next week, which will save you another couple of hours the following week, which will unlock, more time to sleep and recover. And, that's what I'm talking about, is like at the end of the day, that first moment of deciding enough's enough. I need to do something about this. I really can't. This does not look good 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, if I just steer here stuck.
Yeah, I used to spend a lot of time, gosh, so much time drinking far too much alcohol in my backyard, thinking, how do I get out of this hellhole I'm in? And that's how it felt at the time. And so I appreciate your response, because you're right. I think I kind of, it's oversimplified with the question, but it really isn't just one thing. It sort of comes down to me, it came down to really getting clear of what I really wanted, not what society felt I needed to have, not what my boss felt I should have, not what my husband felt I should have. What was it that I needed in order to feel more balanced? Was it changing my career? Was it not changing my career, but maybe adding something or removing something else? And so I think for me, it's not a one answer, but I would say the first thing for me is get clear on what is the problem space and what is it that you really, really want. Like if I could wave a magic wand and give you what you wanted, what would that look like? And the answer will sometimes surprise you and will give you some direction around where you want to go next, right? So as we wrap this up a little bit, I'm curious as to if you have a powerful lesson that you have learned either in your own leadership journey that you wish every CEO or every executive knew.
Yeah, I think that even though we've talked about the lessons a lot in this podcast already, it's really about the small steps. It's
Yeah.
not about the grand romantic gesture. It's about how you show up every day, what you can build into your schedule every day, about the day-to-day consistency, not to make your life boring, but just using consistency and habit and routine as a means of getting you to where you want to go. Because all of those things, how you build your day is what you're prioritizing. right? So if exercise always gets bumped off the schedule, you need to ask yourself why. What's getting in the way of that? If that's what's really going to recharge you and give you the energy and help you be in your body so that you can do good work, that's part of the equation. It's not just like something for yourself. It's not just for you.
Right.
Exercise in this case is for your work as well. It's for your ability to focus. It's for your ability to bring your 100% of your brain and your skills to the problem. And so I think that's the lesson that I would want to communicate is the small things that you can do consistency over time is how you build that. We talked about how when you're on a downward spiral, it can feel like things are just out of control. You're just stuck in the negative energy space. You're tired, overwhelmed, overworked. And you can't jump from there all the way to your highest energy self. You have to go back up the spiral, and so you have to stop, whether it's stopping yourself, slowing yourself down, and starting to go back up. If you think about a train getting started on the tracks, it goes slow. It goes inch by inch, and then it starts to go faster. And that's sort of why you want to think about those habits and routines is what they enable you to do is look back several weeks later or several months later and say, oh, wow, I made a lot of progress because of these small things I did every day. It's not about getting, even though there might be some quick wins, the real benefit comes through the entirety of the journey.
So maybe share with the folks, what's next for Eric? What's next for you? Do you have new programs, new things that you're developing that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah. So there's actually something interesting. We've been reworking how we're managing our programs and services for the clients that we work with. But we have actually, that's an interesting question because we do have a new monthly service model, subscription, membership. I don't know what word to use for it. But at the end of the day, it's about getting the outcomes that you're looking for, having the opportunity to jump into the program to really rework your psyche, your psychology, and how it's showing up in your operations, your systems, and your schedule, being able to access that, be able to access the other part of reworking the operations, the kind of core operations in your business. And additionally, some new tools and technology. In the past, I've been more technology agnostic, but bringing some master business systems in-house so that we can provide those to businesses. So not so much for executives, but for businesses that are having trouble managing all of their disparate tools and spending, several $100s, if not $500, $800, $1,000 a month on different subscriptions, being able to do that and actually do the work in a system that talks to each other. So that's something new, as well as some other AI tools for content creation and such. So that's really, it was an interesting question because I hadn't thought about coming on to share that specifically, but that's how we're shifting and changing and growing the business. Is being able to provide more wraparound service there and give people just a one-stop shop to manage their business and get the support. Because if you don't get your mind right, if you don't get how you're framing your business right on the front end, the tools are secondary. Getting your brain right, aligning you on your goals, making sure that how the practice of your business, how you're running your business, make sure that that's in place. Then the tools slot into the right spot.
Perfect. Well, thanks for sharing that. I will be sharing all of Eric's content in terms of links and contact information in the show notes. But just for verbal sake of argument, where is the best place for folks to find you?
Yeah, my website's the best place. So willity.com, WILLITY.com. Also have a webinar on there if you're interested in learning how to streamline and systematize your work. It's about 20 minutes. So for overwhelmed executives, it's a good length. So there's a webinar on there to check out. And that's really the best way to go ahead and get started.
Awesome. So yeah, go and check out Eric's links. Like I said, they'll be in the show notes down below. Thanks again for being on the show. I'm so happy that you got to join me today.
Great, Tammy. So great to talk with you as well.
Yeah, definitely. And for folks, if you're listening and or watching this on YouTube, thanks again for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time to either listen or watch this content. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, because leaders all over the place need to learn to hear from these experts that I bring on the show all the time to talk about wellness or getting themselves organized or feeling less overwhelmed. So please share this. It really does help when you like and subscribe to get this content out to other leaders just like you. And in the meantime, folks, stay grounded, stay inspired, and remember to exhale.